All right, the umpires are here.
Got Bubba.
Yeah.
Hey, perfect. Look at this. All right. Doesn't get any better than this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bubba.
Thanks, Bubba.
Got a couple of first.
Jason will have to be found by Williams, who is the president of the Jason Community College Student Center. The second victory will be found by Brenda Hollis, the Untitled student for Syria Tribune.
All right. Hey, good.
Glad you're a good catcher. Thank you very much.
Good throw.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Root for the Jammers to win this and move into the playoffs.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Now to get serious. When to get serious, naturally, what are your thoughts now that you have seen the Jacksons, what they're doing at this moment in the 10-year history of that place?
You know, this is my second time here for the dialogues, and all I can say is extremely impressive to move forward with a tradition of justice and accountability before the law. Because the rule of law is always what you have to follow for accountability. It can't be, I think I'm right, I think my cause is best. It has to be the rule of law, and I think that's what Jackson really exemplified. And so it's a great honor to come here.
If I may, I'd like to go back to the Charles Taylor affair. How long did it take, and what kind of research and evidence did you have to gather in order to have a great case?
Well, we did win at trial. We are now on appeal, and in fact, on the 26th of September, we will get the appellate judgment in the Charles Taylor case. And so the appellate judges will have the final word. But we indicted Mr. Taylor in March of 2003. We sealed the indictment because we wanted to keep it quiet, to wait for an opportunity to be able to bring him to the court. Mr. Taylor brokered a deal in that same year, 2003, to leave the presidency in Liberia, go to Nigeria. So for his peaceful exit, if you will, then he was going to be allowed to go to Nigeria. He was in Nigeria basically as a fugitive from justice for 3 years. So in March of 2006, almost exactly 3 years after we indicted him, he was handed over to the tribunal. So the clock began ticking when he came there at the end of March of 2006. The defense took delays to prepare for trial, as they needed to. A lot of material that they had to digest. We thought we were ready for trial in June of 2007, but at the last minute, Mr. Taylor decided he didn't want his appointed defense counsel, and the judges didn't force them to proceed. So we actually began our evidence, we who have the burden of proof, began our evidence in January, first week of January of 2008. Now, we completed our case with 100 witnesses and 500 and some exhibits in about 12 and a half months. Then there was a delay, again, for the defense to prepare, and they took 16 months to present 21 witnesses. We presented 100 witnesses and about 500 exhibits. Mr. Taylor himself testified for 7 months. 7 months, which came back to hurt him because he said things that in a shorter, more focused examination, maybe he wouldn't. So the trial actually closed out again in March of 2000, now I'm getting my years mixed up, 2011. We got a judgment last year in April of 2012. They found him guilty of all the counts of the indictment based on planning a terrifically horrible operation and also aiding and abetting throughout the conflict. Then in May, they sentenced him to 50 years. And then in the summer of 2012, we began to put in our appellate pleadings. We finished oral argument on appeal in January of this year, and now the appellate judges will be bringing in their judgment in September. So from 2006, when we got him, until September of this year has been the length of time it has taken to prepare for trial, conduct the trial, and now conduct the appeal. So a long time.
Two things, Brenda. One, for those who are not fully aware, who was Mr. Taylor and what did you convict him of?
Okay. Mr. Taylor was actually, beginning in December of 1989, a rebel leader who came into Liberia to overthrow the government in Liberia and very quickly took over the whole country. He actually trained rebels to go into Sierra Leone, Sierra Leonean rebels, and he trained them, and then in March of 1991, when he was in control of almost all of Liberia, these trained rebels and his own troops went into Sierra Leone and began the conflict in Sierra Leone. And then throughout that entire time period, according to the evidence we presented, he supported them. He had commanders that were his commanders there. He gave them arms and ammunition. He gave them money. He let them come to Liberia. He trained radio operators. So we charged him with murders, various types of murders. We charged him with various types of sexual violence. We charged him with mutilations and beatings. We charged him with the use of child soldiers. We charged him with looting and enslavement for what happened in Sierra Leone, although he never stepped foot in Sierra Leone. And we said he was guilty because he aided and abetted those crimes, because he ordered some of those crimes, he planned them, and he was also part of a joint criminal enterprise. The judges found him guilty of all those crimes based on planning and aiding and abetting.
It was amazing because I watched 60 Minutes at one time, and it focused on Charles Taylor. And the thing that astounded me was the fact that he was recruiting 12-year-old children to become murderers.
Supposedly some of them were younger than that. There was some testimony of 8, 9, 10-year-olds who were dragging the weapons behind them. And it's not just a lost generation, but it's raising children in a violent environment that some of them can't transition back into a peaceful environment. So it has impacts on the communities they came from, as well as on these young people for the rest of their lives.
One would suspect that the list of prosecutors who have accomplished what you have in terms of the conviction that you have achieved and hope to sustain now in court, that list is relatively short. What does the view look like from where you are in terms of the rest of justice and the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, the view from where I am is a team view. I didn't do this. I was part of a team that did this. And most importantly, we had witnesses who were courageous enough to come forward and talk about the most horrific things, the most private things done to them, and then go back and live among perpetrators and supporters of those groups. These are the people, the teams that I have worked with have been outstanding, courageous, dedicated people. And these witnesses, you can't say enough for them. They are so courageous, they are so determined. The rest of the world, you know, human beings seem to just love to fight. It's not a pretty picture out there today. The International Criminal Court is trying to deal with some of it. They have a lot of impediments. I don't quite know what we can do to stop this kind of conflict, but the ones who are fighting for power leave behind them a trail of broken bodies and broken lives. And that's what we have to remember when we continue to struggle to try to stop these things, stop these crimes, prevent these crimes.
Does the threat that you have convicted him and accused him guilty in a 50-year sentence, does it influence any other tyrant to say, I better not do this?
You know, it might, but when we talk about that, first of all, it deters them. They're not going to be in country to continue to foment problems because they're going to be in jail. So you can remove impediments to moving forward peacefully if they're guilty of those crimes. But in any system, in a national system, here in the United States, when we convict murderers and give them life without parole or the death penalty, does it deter other murderers? Some, probably. Others, no, because they're so sure that they can get what they want and not be held accountable. And as long as they have that feeling, then it is more beneficial to do it than it is detrimental to do it. And until we change that balance, people will continue to do that.
Well, what we're experiencing now is the fact that there's chemical warfare in Syria. At least John Kerry said there is evidence, solid evidence, that chemicals have been used. How do you gather the evidence for that? Keep it in place in case you want to bring the case against Assad.
That's a big challenge. You know, we started going into Bosnia when the war was very hot there. I started going into Bosnia in August of 1994. You know, we got shot at in areas that were being shelled. I had a AK-47 in my face. But at some point it may be that you simply cannot go in and get the evidence. But in a lot of these countries, people have been forced out of the country or have fled, so you can begin to interview them. You can see if they brought out any kind of documentation or other things that would help to prove it. You perhaps can even, depending on what's been done, see if you can fly drones and take air samples. There are different ways you can try to get evidence, but of course the best thing is to be on the ground, to talk to the people there, both the perpetrator groups and the victim groups, and gather it that way. But sometimes you simply can't do it yet. Timing sometimes is important. It's a difficult balance because you have to be in there quick enough to get it before it gets destroyed. But sometimes, because it is so hot on the ground, even stupid people like me won't go in because it's just too dangerous. So it's a difficult balance to strike.
Let me ask you a question about the justice system, because in the United States we talk about whether the justice system is working all the time and how it needs to be changed. How about internationally? You have great experience with this. Does the international justice system work? Are there things that need to be done to make it more workable?
I think it has proven that it does work. I think it's been proven that it's expensive, because when we talk about expenses for these courts, we figure in everything, unlike what we do when we talk about expenses here. We figure in the rent for the buildings, we figure in the vehicles, we figure in the fuel. So it's expensive. And it takes time because these are complex cases, and we really have three broad categories of proof, and each element in those categories we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Underlying crime, murder, rape. Elevating it to a crime against humanity, a war crime, a genocide, that's more elements. Tying somebody way up here at the top with what happened with a guy down here. With different forms of liability. So it's very complex. Can we do it more efficiently? I think we can. I think the judges could help doing that by judicially noticing some things that really are not in dispute. And so we wouldn't have to prove those things. I think that we could have more help from the international community. You know, there's a lot of discontent and criticism, for example, of the Yugoslav court. 20, as I like to say, they're very clever because they've just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the 3-year mandate. But why did they do that? Because the international community would not hand over high-level indictees, carriage. The courts can't get them. States must hand them over. So states must kind of put their money where their mouth is. If they believe in justice, they need to take the steps necessary to allow us to carry it out.
What took place when you concluded the event here just yesterday? What took place in the dialogue to put the declaration in place for the event itself?
Yeah, well, you know what we do is that at the last day of the dialogues, well, actually before we go to the dialogues, Dave Crane sends us out some ideas for the declaration, and then we can think about it in terms of our individual courts. And then the last day, all of the prosecutors go into a meeting, and we talk about the message we want to convey. So it's the prosecutors together talking about the message, and we always have some wonderful young law student or young person who actually makes it legible and everybody understands it. But that's the way we do it. We talk about what is significant for our court we want to tell. What are the problems we're having? What's the message we want to send to the world? So you might have noticed this last declaration was very clear on our condemnation of the use by anybody of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical weapons, and the need to hold people who use such weapons accountable. We thought that was a very important message given the events over the last year. But it's the prosecutors together who decide what the declaration will be each year.
After you enjoy the ball game, where do you go from here?
I'll go back to The Hague. And the reason I'm in The Hague, the Special Court for Sierra Leone is actually cited in Freetown, Sierra Leone. But the Charles Taylor trial took place in The Hague because of concerns about a trial there causing instability in Liberia, Sierra Leone. So the trial is there. I'm not just the prosecutor. They're getting their money's worth with me because I'm also the lead prosecutor in that case. So I'll go back and we'll prepare for the 26th of September, and we're also preparing to close down our court because by the probably first week in December at the latest, there will be no more special court. So we're having to archive all our materials, put together everything so that we can hand everything in, close the door and lock it by the first week in December, and it's time. So we're engaged in all of those activities. And after the judgment in the Charles Taylor case, I will go to Sierra Leone and Liberia for a final outreach throughout Sierra Leone and places in Liberia to talk to people about that judgment, about what the court has done, about the residual court, and the need not to interfere with people because they've had the courage to testify. So I'll talk with them, allow them to talk to me, and we'll finish that dialogue with the people of Sierra Leone and Liberia.
Maybe we could finish with this, Brenda. We don't want the game to get into extra minutes before you get to see it. But talk to us about Robert Jackson and the role that he plays in international justice today and the work that you do day to day.
He was, I think, one of the enduring voices of Nuremberg. And I think that's because he combined such an incredible knowledge of the law with such a sense of fairness and a broad view of what we were really about in Nuremberg in terms of the global community. And the Nuremberg principles and his principles endure today and indeed guide what we do today. It really fashioned how we approach it today. Now, when we began at the Yugoslav court, and I was there as of July of 1994, we had the Nuremberg principles, we had the Nuremberg trials. Procedure had gone well beyond what was there. There had been conventions that had changed the law somewhat. Rights of the accused had advanced, but those enduring principles were there, and that's what guided us. So when I think of Robert Jackson, I think of a luminary, of a person who I think for all time will be able to guide us as to what do we expect of justice, whether it's domestic or international. We expect accountability, but we expect it determined in a fair proceeding with independent, impartial judges. And I have found, since working in these courts since 1994, that my idea about Nuremberg was really not correct, because I thought, everyone will give their best and brightest to Nuremberg. But there were a few best and brightest. There were others who were okay, but they weren't the best and brightest. He was one of the best and brightest. And we found in the other courts the same thing was true. You had a few who stood out and I think helped advance the illumination Robert Jackson brought. You had others who were good, but they were not that transcendent type of participant, but he was. And so to me, that's really a lasting legacy that will endure long beyond the time that our courts close.
What about the generations that weren't here when Nuremberg?
Sort of had this idea of what goes TDY stays TDY. Temporary duty assignment. If I go out on mission for a month or 2 weeks, while I'm gone, I may live it up, I may do this or that, and it was pretty much, that's okay, it's never going to come back. Then it did begin to come back. And I think the same thing happened with Nuremberg. We had this illumination of what it meant to have an international court, both to ensure proper trials, but also protect the rights of accused. And then it kind of slipped back to what I do in my country stays in my country, so I can do what I want. And then we had Yugoslavia, and the reports coming out were so horrific that we kind of went back to Nuremberg. No, there's something so bad for the entire world that we cannot let it stay in the country. And so that, I think, heightened it. And now we've had, these 20 years of a 3-year mandate in Yugoslavia. We've had it in Rwanda, special court. So the story is there to be told. The press kind of likes tags and something that will catch people's attention, and we can give more to it, but education in the schools, talking about it in the communities, talking about it in universities. The Jackson scene, that's the way we're going to keep people sensitive to what happens if we don't treat every human being with the fundamental respect that we all deserve.
That's the reason the wonderful statue of Robert Jackson is by a school, the Samuel J. Love School.
Brenda, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.